Hi, it's Mark from Top Local. We're here with Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver, doing the Pawlik Automotive podcast for this week. How are you doing, Bernie?
Doing very well.
So we're talking about a Land Rover LR2 that was having some fuel rail issues. What was going on with this vehicle?
Yeah, so the vehicle was towed to our shop. The owner was driving it, and suddenly it started running really poorly, and he had it towed in because it just wouldn't run right. So that was basically what was happening. Basically undrivable. Sometimes it would start and run, other times it wouldn't, and it would perform pretty poorly. So that was the issue with the vehicle.
So what kind of diagnosis and tests did you have to do to find out what was going on?
Well, first step, plugging in the scan tool to the vehicle computer and just seeing what information we could extract. When we went to the engine computer, it'll often store codes of the check engine lights on, which it was, and there was a list of I don't have the list in front of me, but there was from what I remember about 10 or 12 stored trouble codes, which usually indicate something big is going on. Doesn't mean there's 12 different problems, because sometimes one problem sets a code for something else, and if the problem had been going on intermittently for a little while, it would set a number of codes. But there was basically, it said a number of codes stored. We cleared them because when you have that many codes stored, it's kind of important to know what is the actual real problem. Came back, there was one code came back, fuel rail pressure too low, and we cleared that. And another time it came back, fuel rail pressure too high. So there's a few different codes. From there, we look at repair data information. What we found is there was a technical service bulletin from Land Rover to reflash the body control module and a couple other modules in the vehicle, not the engine, but a couple other modules that can affect this kind of issue. So we did that, and that was our first step in the diagnosis.
So, all right, how did reflashing things work out?
Well, it didn't actually solve the issue. But it's important to do those kind of things because it's actually easier to reflash something and know that you have all the proper software in place before you proceed with the next step. So while it didn't solve the issue, at least we knew that that wasn't the problem. Next step, we did start doing some tests on the vehicle for the again, the code that seemed to come back all the time was fuel pressure too low, but yet the engine would run and it seemed like it was running too rich. So we hooked a fuel pressure gauge up to the vehicle, monitored some scan tool data, and found some interesting stuff. So I'll share some photos at this point. Here's our LR2 2008 model, and we will go to a picture here. This is the fuel rail of the vehicle. So the fuel rail is where all the high pressure fuel sits, and the fuel injectors are located underneath. So the injectors are underneath. These are some of the injector wires. The injectors are underneath. You can't really see them here. The fuel pressure gauge connects to a little port in the end here. The fuel pressure regulator, which the red arrows point to, this is the part that we eventually replaced, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But when we looked on the scan tool and the engine was running, it was running quite rough, barely running, in fact. On the scan tool, there's a fuel pressure reading, and it said 0 kilopascals. And yet, if you look on this gauge, well, it's 100 psi. It's almost 700 kilopascals, which is way too high. The actual proper reading is around in the 4 to 450 range, which is down 60 to 65 psi. So clearly, the fuel pressure was way too high. And a close-up of the fuel pressure gauge, again, you can see it's 700 kilopascals, and it should be down in this range here. There's a close-up of the fuel pressure regulator, which sits at the end of the fuel rail. And what this does is it monitors the pressure in the fuel rail, sends a signal to the computer so that the fuel pump and the pressure regulator in the tank can adjust the pressure. And finally, after the repair, after replacing it, this is the reading. The vehicle ran great, and this is the reading on the tool. So I think there might be pictures of you and I here. We'll just move this other way. But you see 438, that's with the engine running right, and that's the proper pressure for the system.
So how difficult was the pressure regulator or sensor to actually change?
Quite easy. And I think I may have called that a fuel pressure regulator a couple of times. It's a fuel pressure sensor. So used to seeing a fuel pressure regulator at the end of the rail, I kind of get used to calling that. Yeah, it's actually not too difficult. The fuel rail fortunately comes off quite easily on this vehicle, and the pressure sensor just bolts onto the end, and it's actually, unfortunately for the customer, a pretty easy, straightforward repair.
And as you mentioned, the vehicle ran really well once this work was replaced or work was completed.
Yeah, it ran really well. I mean, flawlessly. And I mean, the other thing to mention is, I said we did do a reflash on several vehicle systems. So everything else, whatever, we don't really know what would happen if we went to do this repair first and then didn't do the reflash. It may not be running as well as it did. So it's important to make sure all that kind of stuff is up to date and current, especially if the manufacturer suggests that the problem with the vehicle requires a reflash.
So when you're mentioning a reflash, you're basically doing a software upgrade.
That's exactly what it is. In the automotive industry, we call it a reflash, but it's a software upgrade. It is another term for it. I guess they call it a reflash because they're flashable
EPROMs.
Flash program EPROMs, yeah. And so that's why they, in the automotive industry, they term it that. But I mean, other manufacturers will also say software upgrade. That's kind of what people are used to hearing.
So while this is the model is an LR2, a lot of people know this as a Freelander, and you haven't said good things about Freelanders in the past. How are these LR2s for reliability and repairs?
Well, yeah, this is a much better vehicle. I mean, when I think of, they don't call these Freelanders in Canada, but in other parts of the world, they call it's a Freelander. And so I guess this is the second generation and a much better vehicle. The first ones there's not too many vehicles where I actually say they're horrible and I wouldn't recommend anyone touch it, but a first generation Freelander is one of those. I just, for anyone who owns one, I just get rid of it. That's all I can tell you, because they're just not worth owning, which is really rare for me to ever say about any vehicle. But the LR2 is nice. I mean, it's the same chassis as a Volvo XC70, quite reliable, much better, far better built vehicle than the previous generation. I mean, the issues that we see, I mean, this fuel rail issue was pretty straightforward. It's a nice, easy, simple repair. The only issue we see with these, it's kind of chronic, is the rear differentials wear out, the bearings wear out prematurely. We do a lot of Volvo XC70s. We do a lot of these LR2s. And interesting enough, there's a new client. I road tested the vehicle. I could hear the differential humming. So it'll need bearings at some point too. So, that's kind of a fact, but that's sort of the worst thing of these vehicles that we see that's chronic. Other than that, it's good. It's a nice vehicle.
So there we are. That's this week's podcast and video. And if you're looking for service in Vancouver for your Freelander LR2, you guys to see our Pawlik Automotive, you can reach them at 604-327-7112 to book your appointment. Check out their website, pawlikautomotive.com. There's hundreds of videos on there, or our YouTube channel, Pawlik Auto Repair. Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks, Mark.